Recording.
All right. Close call there. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As you can see, we have an amazing lineup of speakers for today's presentation. It's going to be a great conversation, folks. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are also taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question for any of our speakers or all of them at any time during the presentation, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use that question and answer tab on your interface and submit your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can during the webinar. We also have a very interactive chat feature here, so I do encourage you, if you've got a question, suggestion, answer, comment, whatever, shoot it on over in the public chat, and we'll take a look at them as they come in, and hopefully we can maybe even get it, make it as part of the presentation itself. And we also have a couple polling questions, so always encourage everybody to take part in those. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we'll be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Progressive Canary Delivery for Reliable Deployments, a panel discussion with Netflix, Snap, AWS, and PlayStation. Good stuff there. Our speakers today are Andy Glover, who is the Director of Productivity Engineering at Netflix, Paul Roberts, or Paul Roberts, as we said earlier, Principal Solutions Architect over at AWS, Kartik Dadwal, who is the Senior Product Manager at Armory, Perry Kyle, who is the Perry Kyle. See, I did it. I knew it. See, you guys put it in my mind. It was Pear, but it's actually Perry Kyle, software engineer over at Snap, and Matt Richardson, who is the manager of DevOps CI/CD over at Sony PlayStation. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today. What a great lineup we have.
Thanks a lot.
Who's going to kick off? Kartik, you're going to be kicking off the conversation, right? So I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and I'll be on the back end if you guys need me for anything.
Thanks a lot, Charlene. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm surrounded by folks in the industry that have a lot of experience doing deployments, so I'm really glad I'm here, and I hope we get a lot out of it, myself included. And we have folks from Netflix, AWS, Snap, and PlayStation. So you're in the right company. A little bit about me. My name is Kartik, and I lead the product management for Kubernetes at Armory. Before that, I started analytics company before joining Armory. So I have a little experience building software myself. And I also have my MBA from UCLA Anderson. So go Bruins. And today, as Charlene shared with you earlier, we will be talking about progressive delivery. And I have some amazing panelists with me today. Like, I'm really excited to actually share this webinar with you guys. So why don't you guys take a little bit of time and talk about yourself, what you're doing at this company, and then a little bit about what motivates you outside just work in general. So Andy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. That was a lot. So yeah, my name is Andy Glover. I work for Netflix. Currently, I run productivity engineering, which is a org inside of platform engineering, and we're focused on making developers at Netflix more productive. Previous to running productivity engineering, I ran delivery engineering, and that is the team we created Spinnaker a number of years ago, and worked a lot with the good folks on this call and others in open sourcing that and growing it both at Netflix and in the community. Outside of work, I tend to run, bike, and swim a lot.
So that's triathlon, Andy. You do all stuff. Thanks a lot, Andy. Really happy you guys are here. Paul, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Happy to be here. So I'm a principal architect at AWS. I work with many large customers who are deploying software at scale. And over the past few years, definitely observed a lot of interesting trends with folks using things like Spinnaker, really focusing on progressive delivery. So, my insight is going to be kind of the trends and observations that I've seen with our customer base, but then also I think there's certainly overlap in terms of how AWS deploys software at scale, and you can see that from our almost daily announcements. For fun, I don't do swimming as much, but I like to do a lot of mountain biking, a lot of dirt biking, a lot of hiking when there isn't smoke in Tahoe. But other than that, I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Paul. Matt, why don't you go next? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so my name is Matt Richardson. I've been in the DevOps space here at Sony PlayStation Network for about 5 years, and it's been quite a journey coming from deployments to on-prem and data center, bare metal machines to VMs hosted in the public cloud. And our next journey is to containerized workloads running on Kubernetes and evolving the way with which we do those deployments. Working now very closely with Spinnaker to do progressive delivery. So definitely a lot of historical context on our journey there. And then outside of work, Paul, you and I should hook up and go for a ride sometime, because I'm also into mountain biking and dirt biking.
That's awesome.
Love
Thanks,
it.
Matt. Yep, I'm actually planning to go swimming with Andy. Andy doesn't even know about it. Learn the thing from him or two. And next we have Perry.
Yeah, my name is Perry. I work at Snap, which is the company that makes Snapchat. I've been at Snap for about 4 years. I originally started on developer tools, working on our in-house continuous delivery deployment system that we had, and then eventually kind of repurposed that into using Spinnaker for much of our deployments as we moved into Kubernetes. So been kind of switching to that team where our team is involved in provisioning, deployment, as well as interacting with our internal service mesh, which is our own Envoy-based service mesh, similar to Istio, if anyone has used the open source Istio. So that's been my main focus. In my free time, I am a hobbyist winemaker. So that's my post-technology career that I'm almost got my degree in. So getting there.
That's pretty awesome. I feel like all of you guys have something that outside work that I love to do, whether it's swimming or running. And Perry, since I'm getting old, wine is something that I've started to pick up. So thanks a lot for bringing it up. Now to sort of kick off, I think we have audience from all walks of life. There are folks that are thinking about better ways of delivering their software, and some folks might have a little bit more experience. So it'd be awesome if we guys can start and level set. Andy, why don't you start and kind of share with us, what do you think, or what is your understanding when people ask you about progressive delivery, right? And let's assume that people on the call have a little bit of understanding, or they would love to know a little bit more.
Sure.
Yeah, heard about it.
And I think actually it's fortuitous that today we're doing this webcast or webinar, excuse me. If you look at any business, you want to be able to obviously move quickly and understand the market. And in fact, today, if you Google Netflix games, you can see that Netflix released essentially a canary of some mobile games in Poland to people on Android devices. And so the idea of progressive delivery is just that, in the sense of you can fashion, let's say, a deployment kind of pipeline that enables you to reduce the risk of breaking all of production, but also gives you an opportunity to get a signal, valid or invalid, with a limited blast radius. And so I use the gaming one as an example of kind of what a business would want to do. And every business, represented here in this this webinar would want to do something similar, in the sense of, whether it be a new business line, games, or just a new feature in some sort of product, rather than just saying, let's deploy it to the whole world and, cross our fingers and make sure it works. The idea with progressive delivery, again, is let's deploy this feature to, let's say, a small amount of users, validate that it works. And if we get a signal that it's good, then we can roll it out to a larger audience, hence the term progressive.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Andy. And I think you touched upon some of really interesting things that I would love to dig on later on, where I'm sure folks are interested about, like, if I'm using Kubernetes versus VMs, how do I do this progressive delivery, right? Platforms also matter, but I'll come back to that in just a tad bit. I know Perry at Snap is doing something really interesting because Snap touches a lot of people, right? I mean, there's millions of users using Snapchat today. Perry, do you have some interesting insights that you think are really unique and the audience can learn from what you guys have done at Snap in terms of progressive delivery?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, when I came to Snap 4 years ago, we actually ran the entire app off of one API. So there was one big API. It's probably similar to a lot of you in the audience that might have a monolithic API that you maybe can deploy a couple of times a day and you're happy if that's good enough. And then as we've had to like change our direction and Snap became more important as far as availability and latency and things to our users, we switched to a more service-oriented architecture. So we have microservices, and we migrated people away from using like a single API that everyone tries to release on, right? And what we've seen from just that sort of migration is crazy. So I checked the stats this morning. We've deployed 600 times to production this morning. And so versus like when I came to Snap, my big first project was to figure out how to get us to 30 deploys a day. So that was like a big effort just to get us to be able to safely do that. So that's the first thing, like as far as like getting to, I think, a state where you can progressively deliver things is to have service-oriented architecture. Like you have a monolith, it's quite difficult to do that. You could, but I think like allowing future teams to have their own app that they're responsible for and that they experiment with is the first step. It's kind of the predecessor to being able to do that. And then two, like one thing that we've been trying to, the first step for us, I guess, was just kind of getting Canary deployments to work, which is one aspect of progressive delivery, just allowing like a randomized set of requests. And so to hit a certain backend that you can instrument, right? And that's worked fairly well, but there's still some edge cases that we're working on figuring out. And I think that's where a lot of the progressive delivery stuff kind of is a little bit different than like your idea of a one box deployment or Canary deployment. And that's where it is like, how can we test it on a subset of users and not affect all users with an equal amount of traffic? And I think that's what Andy touched on, is like, how do we target new things to certain regions or certain users or like certain A/B tests? And that's kind of what we've been working on internally at Snap right now, is like, how do we allow our main edge to actually route users to specific endpoints or specific pods in Kubernetes? And that's something that we've been kind of experimenting with on a couple of our bigger services, and it's been working fairly well, and we're going to expand that program as well. So that's kind of I think some of the main stuff we do there is when we have so many users in so many countries as well, it's very useful to get that data from specific users in specific countries, because there's certain bugs that only crop up in other regions as well. So that's something, or even device types, right? That's the other sort of dimension you can split on in a progressive delivery, is like maybe some old devices start crashing. The new ones that all your developers have all work because they all got iPhone X's or above, right? And then it looks fine there. Then like everyone that has an old iPhone SE, like Snapchat doesn't load anymore. So that's something that we've really been trying to figure out, is like, how do we merge all these QA processes together into one delivery pipeline? And we're not all the way there yet, but that's something that we're working on integrating more so.
Thanks a lot, Perry. I think as you talk about, I think you touched about something really interesting, which was Canaries and progressive delivery. I think the audience can really benefit if we can clearly sort of help them understand that these things are a little different, even though they are connected. It's about releasing your software. So Matt and Paul, I would love to hear you guys talk about. Can you lay out the difference between Canaries, like doing Canaries, and progressive delivery? Like, what is the difference between the two for the audience? So Matt, you can go first, and Paul, please feel free to build up on that if you may, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So that aligns well with some of our journey. So we initially started deploying with what we called Canaries, which was meant deploying a pod or a VM to a production environment. So any change would only affect a subset of your customers or a subset of the API calls. But once we deployed that, it became live immediately. So that was taking customer traffic. So we were getting signals back to know whether it was successful or not. But if it was not successful, we may be impacting our customers, which we don't want to do. We want to enable impact-free changes to deliver only the benefits and value that we want to. So building on that, and then some of the other capabilities that you have with progressive delivery is the ability to, let's say, deploy to a production environment, but not take traffic yet. Keep it dark, if you will, to allow internal testing, say, in a production environment where you have all the same back-end connections that you may not have in your staging environment. And then once you're healthy there and you're getting your health signals on that dark side, then progressively direct or switch traffic, live customer traffic to those healthy, whatever it may be, pods or services.
Got it.
Yeah,
Right,
I think, Andy kind of touched on this in his example of, their launch in Poland, but I think one of the areas where folks are using AWS specifically in this progressive delivery model is that locality, and the location matters. And, with progressive delivery, like blast radius is something that everyone's concerned about. Like, you don't want to impact, all of your users. And, Perry mentioned, like, if you have one API and you have this monolith, you got to be really careful. So what we see from our customers is that even in single geographic regions, they're using our availability zones, which actually encompass multiple data centers. And once you start spreading across multiple availability zones, even within a region, you can start distributing your load. You can also start building in additional layers of resiliency. But I think one of the things that's really important on the progressive delivery side is some metrics that you start looking at. And again, when we think about regions, where are my users? Am I trying to, if Netflix just launched a gaming service that's in Poland, you probably don't want to have users, accessing it, here on the West Coast in California, because there's high latency. So you'd probably want to look at, when you do these rollouts, start looking at latency, look at, how long it takes for your users to round trip between, the servers or whatever they're interacting for. And that's just one metric, but there's many different metrics that people look at. And I think that's certainly a really important thing to consider, as you're doing these deployments, and if you want to take it up higher. So if you say, hey, we're doing deployments today, throughout, California, maybe you need to expand and you want to hit the East Coast, so you have lower latency there. So it's something that, we see a lot from our customers and that they leverage every day.
Thanks a lot, Paul. There are two things that actually came out of this conversation, which I want to touch upon just in a tad bit. But before I do that, I do want to bring audience attention to something that's going to be really helpful for them. So we at Armory are actually working on our progressive delivery feature right now, and we are working with some EA partners as I speak. So I would love to, we would love to have folks on the call if they want to join our design partner program, to go and fill out the form that's under the handout section. It should actually show up if you go and click on handout. Under your handouts, you can click on either handouts or offers, and this will take you to a landing page. You can put in your information, very simple things, and then we can get back to you and see if you are a right fit for the early access design partner, and we would love to chat with you. So I wanted to bring that up. And also, it would be great if we can get our first poll, if you guys don't mind. So can I have the moderator? Okay, submit. So you guys should see this poll on the screen. Do you guys see the poll on the screen? Awesome.
Yep. Yeah, we have some people who are answering the polling question. The question is, where are you in your continuous delivery journey? You can choose from currently outgrowing existing tooling, anticipating outgrowing existing tooling in the next 12 months, or satisfied with existing CD tooling. So you can go ahead and make your choice, and we'll give the audience just a few seconds or so to go ahead and make your choice. While that's happening, just a quick reminder, if you guys have a question for any of our star-studded lineup of panelists here, go ahead and just put it in the question and answer tab, and I'm sure they'll be addressing questions throughout. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and close this polling question here in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's closed, and let's take a look at the responses.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Charlene, for helping out with the poll.
You bet.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The polls are pretty close. We see that 38% of the people, almost 40, I should say, they're saying anticipating outgrowing existing tooling in next 12 months. About 34% are satisfied with what they have, and about 30% are saying that they're currently outgrowing existing tooling. So what that means is almost close to 65 to 70% of the people are outgrowing their existing tooling that they're using for CD or delivery, or they will actually outgrow in next 12 months. So it's very interesting. And I think that is a really good segue into my next question for you guys. It would be great if you can talk about what are the platforms that you guys use or targets you guys use to deploy these applications, because I'm sure as the audience are thinking of using better tools, they might want to think about what are the better ways for us to deploy these applications as we are thinking of progressive deliveries. So Annie, let me just circle back and start with you. Can you talk about the platforms you guys use at Netflix, and how can the audience who are not at the Netflix scale can think about thinking about different platforms and target for their applications?
Sure. And so by platforms for progressive delivery, Netflix uses Spinnaker. But it's interesting. There are a mixture of other things as well that are used in tandem with Spinnaker. So I did see a question about feature flags, and I think feature flags are part of, let's say, the subset of like how one could achieve progressive delivery. But yeah, and you don't need to use Spinnaker. Ultimately, what you need is essentially, automation that can obviously put something somewhere. That's the easy part. The hard part then is figuring out, okay, if you really want to do a canary, what kind of traffic you want to route to it. There was a question, I think, somewhere in terms someone was asking, like, what do you use headers and whatnot? It just really depends on what you want to do. Going back to what Paul was talking about in terms of, latency or customers or whatever it is, regions. Netflix uses a wide variety of, let's say, strategies there, either round robin or, device ID. One thing to keep in mind there is just as you decide how you're going to route traffic, it might be good to think through from a randomization standpoint, so that you're not always routing the same people to a canary and they're having a degraded experience, which we've learned through the years can happen. And then you need great observability. So at Netflix, we have our own telemetry system called Atlas. But going back to everything everyone's talked about, if you really want to get a valid signal, you've got to produce a valid signal, and you've got to know how to interpret that valid signal or that signal. So you need automation, could be like Jenkins or Spinnaker or something else. You need some sort of way to route traffic through ELBs or some other intelligent routing service. At Netflix, we use Zool. And then you need great observability, or telemetry, I should say, and then the ability to like act on it, and hopefully that's plugged back into your automation. So earlier, someone talked about like when there's going to be let's say a problem or a breaking change, you want to be able to detect it and then roll it back or roll forward as soon as possible. And all of that is again incumbent on like great automation and great signals or signal processing.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Andy. Matt would love to hear from you in terms of what exactly is the target on which you're deploying your applications. Are you deploying everything in Kubernetes, or like are you some other targets? And what's your mechanism of doing progressive deliveries on these targets? But would love to hear what you guys are doing at PlayStation, or what you have seen in general, right?
Yeah. So we are targeting VMs hosted in a public cloud for most of our workloads today. And we've had success with Canaries there, and feature flags as a way of rolling out new features. most recently, we are investing a lot of research and development and had some success already deploying to Kubernetes and using some of the traffic shaping services, everything from DNS load balancing services within Kubernetes to shape the traffic and direct, for us, mostly API hits to specific services. So those are the two platforms. And we're also using Spinnaker to develop some of those deployment pipelines, as well as some other tools as well to assist us in that journey.
Got it. Thanks a lot, Matt. Perry would love to understand about your deployment targets, and also Andy touched upon observing your running application, right? Like as you're talking about, can you guys hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, perfect. As Andy talked about observing the application and understanding, are they, when you're doing progressive deliveries, are the applications performing as expected? So would love to hear from you. How at Snapchat are you guys doing progressive delivery? What's the target, and how are you observing the applications as you are rolling out the new features and the new versions of the
Yeah, I think that's a
application?
good. Yeah, I think like, the core thing of progressive delivery is like observability. If you can't observe the application, there's no way you can achieve progressive delivery other than you're just gonna like guess that 5 minutes is long enough for you not to get a customer ticket, which I may or may not have done earlier in my career. But anyway, so I think that's the key point is like if your applications are, there's two things that need to be standardized. You need to standardize on a metric stack if you want to be able to deliver multiple applications using the same systems and observe them in the same way. And they also need to have standardized naming of metrics or tagging, such that like just switching a tag can make me look at my dependency now and not me anymore. And I can see if stuff is going wrong, either from automated systems or from a dashboard, right? And that's kind of like what, one of the easiest, or not really easiest, but one of the best ways you can do that is like, to take over at least the HTTP metrics, or at least the connection metrics. And that's kind of where we standardize on a service mesh, is that we can see like, gRPC response codes, or we can see that you're on H2 and you're throwing 500s. That's an error. And these things are what we use to actually canary and do ongoing health checks, both inside of like Spinnaker for deployments, also like with configuration changes, right? We have our own health check service that does a very similar thing to Canary. And whenever we like roll out like, a routing change or something that's especially dangerous, that's the main thing I think that actually took a while to get there, was getting everyone standardized on metric naming and metric stack, because there was just people using stuff all over the place when I first got to Snap. And so that's the biggest thing that unlocked the ability to do a lot of this stuff is observability. And that is a good time series database of some sort, whatever flavor you want to pick, and being able to like query that and know how to query it across and repeat it over and over again for different services.
Thanks a lot, Perry. Paul, there's something Andy mentioned that was very interesting, and I think since Andy's from Netflix, I'm pretty sure audience caught that word, Spinnaker. So I also wanted to get your take. My understanding, for the sake of the audience, is that Spinnaker is one way of doing your deployments. It's a platform/tool that helps you deploy application. Of course, Armory has commercialized Spinnaker. So thanks a lot, Andy, for mentioning that, Spinnaker. But what we at Armory are also doing is looking at other ways of doing progressive delivery, right? That is outside Spinnaker. So we as a company are also investing heavily in looking at companies that don't use Spinnaker, but still want to do progressive delivery. So Paul, would love to hear your take in terms of how people, engineers on this call, can think about doing progressive delivery, even if they don't want to pick Spinnaker or just want to get going with progressive delivery.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so at AWS, we see a lot of different platforms. We see folks that are using things like Flux with Kubernetes. We see customers that are using Argo CD to do delivery. And then we're also seeing, another, project that's starting to gain momentum, which is Crossplane. So So there's a lot of different tools that customers are using to accomplish this, and then even our own tooling such as AWS Code Deploy can help with this, and our whole CodeStar suite. So with that said, I mean, it's really dependent on the stack that you want to choose. And I think Perry mentioned something that's really great is start talking about like standardization. And I think what's really important for customers and for engineers to think about is like, what tooling are you trying to, what tooling do you want to work with? What kind of platforms do you want to work with? So, is your stack, VM based? Is it container based? Is it function based? Is it bare metal? It's really dependent, and then try to align that tooling that best supports that. So, we have mentioned, things like Spinnaker, but I think you just really need to dive deep and to determine, what's going to be the best delivery platform that helps you with your progressive delivery goals, and then start making those investments. Because if you make the wrong choice, it's going to take you a lot of time to correct that later. And then the other thing I think we haven't really touched on too much is service meshes. So, I touched on latency a little bit, and what we see customers doing is, when they're doing their deployments against things like Kubernetes, the way that they control access to Kubernetes via the network is they can segment, which users are going to which network segment within their specific cluster. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about this, and we see customers using things like Istio from a service mesh perspective. So lots of different options.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Really appreciate the insight about what you talked about. Hey, how do you look at when you're using Kubernetes? And also for the audience, we just have brought up a pop-up that actually, again, takes you to the same sign-up page. And I want to talk about it just a little bit. I think this is a perfect time. We at Armory are also building a solution that can help you do progressive delivery in a very simple yet useful way. And if you click on the pop-up, if you sign up, I'm happy to talk to you and understand if you are a good fit for the design partner program that we're running. And I just want to take like a few minutes and talk about what we are doing. We are starting with a simple progressive delivery model where we want to meet your developers where they're at. So allow them to trigger the deployments, but still allow them to control how the new feature is being rolled out to your target environment. For example, you could specify roll out 10% of the traffic on my existing application to this new version. For example, if you're launching version 2, you could say roll out 10% of my existing traffic to this version 2. Then wait for a tad bit. You can check the metrics as Andy and Paul talked about, right? You can observe your application. You can see if that 10% traffic is looking fine, and then you can say roll out 20% or 30%, and that way you'll be able to slowly roll out the new traffic, or what I call it version 2, slowly but gradually, and you can control the blast radius. So with that being said, I would love to have the next poll. So can Charlene help me out with the next poll? Thanks a lot, Charlene. So on your screen, you will see the next poll that we have, which talks about what are your current or desired deployment targets. I think this will be really good for the panel folks to know about. Since Paul from AWS is here as well, I'm pretty sure he'll be interested in this one. Okay, we have on-prem, VMs, Amazon EC2s, EKS, ECS, Lambda. All right, Charlene, how long will this poll be there so that audience know about it?
I'm going to keep the poll up for a full minute or so. Let the audience take a look at all of the different answers that are available to them, make their choices, and then in about a minute or so, I'll close it. Karthik, you'll see when it has been closed, and at that point, if you want to discuss it, feel free.
Sure, I will do it later. Actually, I want to do my submission as well.
For what it's worth, here on our side, we can actually see the folks coming in. So it's really interesting to see, the mix. Certainly from the AWS perspective, I see customers using many different platforms, and of course we have customers that are still, on-prem. But I think the major takeaway is like when I think about different compute platforms, and that's kind of what I call it, the different compute primitives. Certainly we're seeing a mix of, containers, functions, and virtual machines and bare metal. And the data on our side that we're getting is really cool. So I can't wait to dive a little deeper into this, Karthik.
Absolutely. Let's see what the results of the poll are. I think it's still open, but I see very interesting numbers. Actually, looks like the poll is closed. So I see 13% on-prem. So like we had a lot of options. So 13% are saying on-prem, about 12% EKS. So good one, Paul, for you, 12% EKS. And then we have about 11% saying VMs. I'm just going to pull out the interesting numbers. So it looks like Amazon EC2, EKS, ECS from about 30%. And if I include Lambda as well, so that's about 42%. Actually, now if I include Kubernetes, that's another 10%. So what I see is I see a fair distribution of people deploying at different targets. Paul, why don't you go ahead? I know you wanted to touch upon the different targets that you see at AWS, right? So please go ahead. Right before the poll, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, I think more just responding to the audience and kind of what we were seeing here. So, I mean, it looks like the majority is certainly on the container side. Forget our respective services, but I think that's definitely a trend that I think all of us, at our respective companies, I think we're certainly observing, a big push to move to containers. And I think it's certainly reflected here. So that's certainly interesting. And I think, again, going back to like the tooling. So, I mentioned a couple of things, whether it's Flux or Argo, Spinnaker, Crossplane, these are all platforms today, that can deploy to Kubernetes. I mean, we also see other projects like Pulumi that's in the mix that's also being able to deploy to Kubernetes. So, but I think, again, the major takeaway I'd have is that when you're evaluating these different delivery platforms, look at them for the richness that they provide if they're going to meet your requirements, and what kind of metrics are they funneling back. I mean, I certainly know on the Spinnaker side, when you're doing a deploy and you're looking at how's the deployment going, what's the percentage of the different pods that have gone up. So I think that's really important as you look at the different tooling.
Yeah,
Paul.
I would add on to that because I think it's and it's also related. There's a question in the Q&A about like what are the challenges faced in Canary deployments. And when you think about like change, not so much in the context of deployments, but just change in terms of like technology and companies and looking at new tools. There's people, process, and technology. And we spend a lot of time talking about technology, like whether you're using containers, VMs, bare metal, and then like you're using Flux, Jenkins, Spinnaker. I think it's more important to focus in on like the process because that's a hard one to change, or actually even harder is people. Assuming you're on this call, like people are interested in this. The next one is think through the process. When it comes to Canaries, like they are easier said than done. There's like that question is incredible in terms of like, what are the challenges faced with Canaries? I think we've talked about a number of them during this call. And those are challenges regardless of tooling in terms of like, what is the deployment strategy? And then what are the metrics? How are you going to get them? How are you going to like act on those metrics? And then, what do you do when it works well? And then more importantly, what do you do when it doesn't work? And every tool or platform out there has different ways of handling it, but you should think through that before you even look at a tool and kind of, again, think about from the business standpoint. You've got different businesses represented here. Netflix has many different, let's say, key metrics that will leverage for quote unquote Canaries. And I imagine every other business is the same. So really focus on the process. And I think if you nail that, then picking a tool is actually fairly easy.
Thank you, Andy. And Perry, I think Andy talked about two things that are very interesting, that you have to not only think about the tool, because a lot of people overthink the tool, but miss the process, right? Of making the best out of that tool. Could you talk about like the different problems you ran into at Snap as you were thinking of not only the tools, but the process? And also you can talk about a little bit about how your deployment pipeline looks like, but in the context of other mid-sized company, because the audience, of course, I'm sure have smaller scale than Snap. So what is the big takeaway that they can take from your learnings at Snap? That would be great.
Yeah, I think like in general, like teams will try to be a lot more creative with their deployment strategy than they really need to be. And so that's a thing that I would have pushed back more on earlier on if I would have actually probably spent more time thinking through the process of like, why did they think they needed to have an integration test in every region before they deploy? Things like that, that really kind of complex, made it a little bit more complex for people to understand how they should be deploying. I think that was like one thing that I think that if you can like standardize a set of things and like either dog food it on your own applications, see if it works fine. If you're like an infrastructure team like we are, we have big applications to test on. And then you can like sell that vision to other teams that are smaller or the same size. That's a good thing you can do to start figuring out like what's the process that works. Like, you know, do you have postmortems at your company? Is there like data you can pull to see like why have we had postmortems? What was the root cause? Like one of the things that we found that is like, you know, almost all the postmortems, there was some sort of error rate elevation on their endpoint, right? Like there are some where that's not true, but in general, there's always like something that would indicate that something was wrong on the back end. And that's how we came up with our core metrics, for instance, like is what Andy talked about. It's like what actually captures an outage. And like sometimes you think a metric is going to capture an outage, but it really is useless and just adds more noise to the problem. So finding those key things, and you should keep it as small as possible. That's like, this is something that's broken, was something that took a while actually to figure out, because we had some metrics that turned out to be kind of duplicated in what they indicate, right? So you want to try and pick the right metrics that indicate a problem with different pieces of the system, be it latency as well as error rate, as well as possibly even 200s, right? Because sometimes maybe the metrics, you know, had a brownout or whatever during the period, and you shouldn't allow a deployment to progress forward. And so I think choosing the metrics was, and getting them to work for everyone was a key part of getting stuff to be safer, and people making less mistakes. And then coming up with a way to stamp out these pipelines over and over again was the thing that we worked on this past year. It was like, well, we're pretty sure these work. And like now we have a system that you just have to like put some config in your repo, and now it spits out a Spinnaker pipeline that has all these things, because now we know that like it will work for all these different services and different sort of usage patterns, right? And that's something that we've really tried to figure out, is like, how do we stamp these things out but still allow enough flexibility to support, you know, very complex app deployments that might have 10 microservices that all go out to 5 different regions and different orders. These are things that we're working on with tooling and automation.
Thank you, Perry. Matt, would love to understand that when we talk about progressive delivery, sometimes a lot of people think about, oh, do I need to do everything that progressive delivery comes with? For example, oh, I'm actually controlling the blast radius by only sending 10% of my live traffic to the new version that I want to test. And then between sending 10% and then later on sending 20%, I want to automate the process of, hey, after sending 10% of the traffic, go and check out this metric. If it looks good from my metric provider, then move on to the next step. And they are trying to automate that right away. I know we have been working very closely to take it step by step, where what we are trying to do is, let's try to do progressive delivery first, right? And then as things are working out for you, as you're able to roll out traffic slowly to your new version that you're trying to release, if that works fine, then try to add automated analysis between those steps. So can you talk about how the audience on the call can just take one step at a time and move towards progressive delivery? That means just control the blast radius of this new version that's going out, right? And even if they have to manually go and check the metric provider for a month, do that. But like, would love to understand, you know, your take on how they can slowly get started and not think of it as a massive effort.
Yeah, I think tying it back to some of the previous conversation points, it comes back to what's your individual service? What's your workload? What are the metrics that your service is emitting? And how to identify what is a successful deployment. I think everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. So I think understanding what makes your service deployment successful? How do you capture those metrics? And then build progressive delivery around that. And the approach that you take to deliver progressive delivery will depend a lot on your specifics. I did see an interesting question in the Q&A, which I don't see right now, but it was essentially this progressive delivery improve, to paraphrase, improve the lives of the developers or the operations teams more. The way I see it is progressive delivery, if you have a separate operations team deploying versus development team, progressive delivery gives confidence to the deployment process. And confidence in deployments enables you to deploy more quickly, more safely, and allows the developers and engineers to deliver features to customers more quickly. So I think it feeds back all the way back to the developer, because ultimately with that confidence comes faster iteration, ultimately delivering value to your customers more quickly and more safely.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Paula and Andy would love to get your take as well, because you guys come from a lot of experience working at Netflix and AWS. How can the audience sort of like get started, slowly but surely, right, towards progressive delivery, and not think of it as a massive effort that, they need to like spend 6 months to understand first? So we'd love to quickly hear your thoughts and how people can get started on the call.
Go for it, Paul.
I think it's with any technology. Don't be afraid to start experimenting, number one. And I see a couple questions coming in, and someone's asking, how do we deploy across availability zones, regions, clusters? Like, how do we even orchestrate this? And I think you have to start somewhere, and you have to begin testing, and you have to come up with, a culture or a methodology on how you want to deploy your apps. And, I think Perry had a great answer earlier where he talked about, if you have a monolithic app, it's really difficult. But then if you have a service-oriented architecture and you have a lot of microservices that you can focus on, you can start pushing updates, and you can be observing, what's the user's response? What are you seeing there? What do you need to do? Do you need to make any adjustments? I think that's really important. So I think, my recommendation would be like, focus on minimizing blast radius for deployments. Think about the tooling, different tools that you want to use. And we've mentioned several on this call, Jenkins, Argo, Flux, Spinnaker, there's many others out there, CodeDeploy. So, but just start experimenting a little bit and, begin testing and start capturing, like, kind of understand what your own success criteria is, because it's going to be different for each customer and your requirements are going to be different for everybody. But just dive in. And then, the community here, there's certainly all of us, but the progressive delivery community is strong, and there's a lot of people that can help you on this journey.
Thanks, Paul. Andy, we'd love to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think it's something that Perry said earlier. Maybe just start with health checks. Like, that is your canary. Like, build in automated health checks into your services. And then again, back to the process, you got to figure out, well, how will you actually validate the health check worked? Like, is there something you can use to like ping the service? And assuming that, your health check passes, then the next step you got to figure out is like, can I get a little amount of traffic to it? And this is, again, predicated on a lot of the tooling. But again, the processes you want to think about, like, always alive or whatever, never down, or blue-green deployments, right? So just think simple in terms of, I have one, I'll call it a cluster, but it's a pod, whatever it is, a pod cluster. One thing has version 1, and then something else has version 2. And I'm going to validate that the health check works on version 2. And once it passes, to Paul's point, you got to start somewhere, allow some traffic to go to it. And that's essentially, the skeleton process for getting kind of Canaries going. And then of course you want to figure out how to shut down the old one and route all traffic to it. And then you can get more and more sophisticated as you build up confidence that, hey, like, we've actually got this working. And it's a huge journey. Like, Netflix is still on that journey. We're always learning how to do better Canaries, but it ultimately started with simple automation that, like, basically was able to say, is this new thing healthy? And can we route some traffic to it? And then you'll quickly find that, like, the health check is not enough. Like, you need some other metrics, and it's a learning process, but you got to start somewhere.
Thanks a lot, Andy. And I know we have about 10 minutes left on the webinar. I just want to again, bring audience attention that we would love to hear from you if you guys want to see if you guys are a good design partner for us. Right now, we're working on the progressive delivery solution at Armory. So would love to hear from you. So if you go to handouts and under handouts, if you click on offers or the handout tab, you can click on one of the offers that we have. That will take you to a page, and there you can actually go ahead and fill up your information, and we can get back to you and talk about our design partner program. So we'd love to hear from you and see if you would like to enroll in our design partner program at Armory for progressive delivery. And we have one last poll, so would love for you guys to publish that. Thank you so much. So the last poll that we have is, how long does it take your developer org to push code from commit to production? Less than an hour, 1 hour to 1 day, 1 day to 1 week, 1 week to 1 month, or more than 1 month. And as I read this, it is so interesting. I think Perry said that just today you published new version like 300 times or something. So Perry, I think you would look at this question and would love the audience to hit less than an hour. I know.
I think he said 600.
600?
Yeah, it was 600 this morning, as when we started the webinar.
Andy, I'm really curious. Do you think you guys can beat that number? Like today, you launched like maybe 1,000 changes at Netflix.
Yeah. It just depends. I was answering another question. Like, it just depends on the service and the environment. Someone was asking about it. I think it was actually in response to Perry saying 600, and there was a question. Well, how do you do that in a PII, compliance strict environment? And in fact, you don't, most likely. That environment, at least at Netflix, deploys, let's say far less frequently than some of our edge services, which are deploying, thousands of times a day.
Do you think you can unpack the last point a little bit? Like why, for the sake of the audience, like why would you not be able to deploy in a PI environment like 1,000 times a day or 600 times a day?
Well, I won't say it's impossible. But for example, in some PI environments, you need like checks, like a human has to actually validate that like this thing is good. And so I think therein lies your upper bound in terms of like, can you deploy 1,000 times a day? I guess if you have, someone who can sit there and approve an deployment 1,000 times a day or something like that. So
got it. It's so interesting. So are you saying that even at a Netflix scale, like you would want somebody to make sure that they're looking at this release if there's anything to do with PI, right? So.
Well, what I'm saying is that by like law, like SOX compliance, like there are some issues that you humans need to be involved.
Got it. Thanks a lot. I mean, I'm glad you shared that, because a lot of times I've spoken to people and they're saying, oh, if you have to move fast, you got to automate the process. And I'm glad that you shared, because it's coming from the behemoths of the world, right? It's okay at times that you have to have a manual process, like if it's needed. So it's not unseen. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And now we have interesting results for the poll. So 22% of the audience said that it takes less than an hour. So Perry, you have some competition. I don't know, maybe like thousands today. And then 30%, almost 30%, say 1 hour to 1 day. And then the rest of the audience are, actually I should call this out because this is interesting. About 25% between 1 day to 1 week, and the rest is a week to a month or more. So looking at the poll, looks like you have almost 70% of the audience, or 75% of the audience, being able to deploy code in a week, which is actually not bad given the fact that we in Silicon Valley think everybody moves fast, but outside, like people are still like catching up. And on the interesting side, almost 53% of the audience are able to deploy code within 1 day. So that is good to hear as well. I know we got about 6 minutes left, and I want to give 5 minutes back to our host. Would love to hear like one-liner from you guys, anything that you want the audience to take away as they are leaving the seminar, thinking about continuous delivery or progressive delivery or just Canaries, right? Would love to hear just one-liners from you guys. Go ahead, Andy. Like, let's start. Andy, Paul,
yeah,
Perry,
sure.
Matt.
One-liner. If your
Yes.
business cannot do progressive delivery, your competitor will figure it out and crush you. So figure it out.
Focus on minimizing the blast radius, and progressive delivery will help you quite a bit with that.
Go ahead, Perry.
Yeah, progressive delivery is the faster you and safer you can deploy, the faster you can beat your competitors, or the faster that your developers can develop and actually focus on their job.
Thanks, Perry. Matt, better be an awesome one.
Deliver with confidence with progressive delivery, and that'll feed back again to the developers, and ultimately the real beneficiaries are the customers receiving those safe deployments.
Thanks a lot, Matt. I have a little more cheesy one that if you're thinking of progressive delivery, I think to me, progressive delivery means armory. And I'll leave you guys at that. Thanks a lot. So, over to my host, so she can close the webinar. Thanks a lot, Charlene. Over to you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed your conversation today. I love being on the back end and kind of watching the chats come in too, and all the questions. So awesome stuff. Just another plug. Armory's got a compliance operations, aka Comp Ops webinar happening on September 30th at noon. So I'm sure you can just go to the Armory website and check that out. Am I right, Kartik? Oh, you're on mute. For those of us playing webinar bingo, you're on mute. Just click that one off. So.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Charlene. Yes, you're right.
All right, great. Well, just a quick reminder to the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will have the opportunity to access it later on demand. Following the webinar, we are going to be sending out an email that does contain a link to access that webinar. The webinar is also going to be on the devops.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. And also a quick reminder to anybody who did submit questions. We had so many great ones, too many for us to go through during the webinar. So if you didn't get your question answered during the webinar, please know that the folks at Armory are getting a copy of all the questions that came in, and I'm sure that somebody from their organization or one of these fabulous organizations will be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. Okay, real quick, I did mention at the top of the hour we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do that drawing. All right, our big winners today.
In the seminar, he's
so sorry, but no, if you're in the webinar, you are not eligible. I'm so sorry to tell you that. So, but our first winner today is, let's see, Raphael P. Congratulations, Raphael. Our second winner today is Alan S. Congratulations, Alan. I love this. Our third winner today is Timothy Q. Congratulations, Timothy. And if I mispronounced your name, because I believe it is the French version, I apologize. And our last winner today is Maria V. Congratulations, Maria. We're going to be sending all 4 of you an email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, just check your spam folder, and hopefully it will be there. But God, what a great, I'm just so bowled over at today's conversation. It was such a good one. I do want to thank you guys, all 5 of you, each and every one of them. You guys are just awesome in your own right. So thank you all so much for sharing your talent, your expertise, and your experience with the audience. All great stuff. So thanks again. 2 thumbs up on my end, and I'm sure the audience gives you thumbs up as well. And in that vein, I also would like to thank the audience for joining me today and having such a great time with me. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am now signing off. Have a great day, everybody. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
guys.